"Sir, please take my baby brother. He's really hungry." That's what she said, barefoot on a busy sidewalk, clutching a baby wrapped in a towel. She wasn't asking for money. She was trying to save his life. She had no idea the man she stopped was a billionaire. And what he did next changed everything. Stay tuned to witness how one desperate plea turned into a life-changing story no one could have predicted. And don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Julian Reed didn't stop for anything. Not for delays, not for detours, and certainly not for the unexpected. As the billionaire CEO of one of the most dominant AI firms in Texas, his days were sealed in concrete. This morning was no different. Chauffeured into downtown Austin, tailored suit sharp, schedule packed to the minute, Julian was already rehearsing his pitch when he stepped out of the car. Then a voice cut through the city like it wasn't supposed to be there. "Sir, please take my baby brother. He's really hungry." He turned. Standing alone near the curb was a girl, no more than 10. Her coat was thin, sleeves rolled to hide fraying seams. Her sneakers were worn raw, but her posture was upright, steady. In her arms lay a baby boy wrapped in a towel too small to protect him from the wind. His head leaned into her chest, too still, too quiet. The girl met Julian's gaze without flinching. "I'm Naomi," she said. "This is Ezra. Our mom said she'd be right back." But that was 3 days ago. There was no panic in her voice, just exhaustion. And something sharper, an unspoken calculation that he, of all people, might understand. Behind him, his driver asked if he wanted to keep moving. Ahead, the crowd parted for the crosswalk. But Julian didn't move, because the world had just handed him a decision that wasn't in his calendar. Julian had faced boardrooms full of billionaires, senators, and skeptics. He'd negotiated mergers, diffused crises, outmaneuvered lawsuits. But no one had ever looked at him the way Naomi did now, like the entire world had narrowed to a single fragile question. Would he leave too? He cleared his throat. "Where's your mother?" Naomi shifted her grip on the baby. She went out. Said she'd be back before bedtime. A pause. She didn't come back. Her voice wasn't shaking. It was steady, practiced. Like she'd already had to explain it too many times to people who didn't really care. Julian's mind spun through options. 911, CPS, shelters, the right systems, the legal steps. But even as the checklist formed, his gut recoiled. Something in Naomi's tone told him she already knew what those systems could do, and what they couldn't. He looked at Ezra. The baby stirred weakly, mouth twitching near sleep, cheeks sunken. Naomi adjusted the towel like a second instinct. When Julian reached for his phone, Naomi's eyes flickered with panic. "Please don't call the police. They'll split us up." They always do. Always. That word stuck in his throat. He had calls to return, meetings to lead, money to make. But for some reason he didn't fully understand yet, Julian Reed stayed exactly where he was. Julian didn't ask any more questions. He simply opened the car door and gestured for Naomi to get in. She paused for half a breath, her eyes scanning the street behind him, as if still hoping her mother might round the corner. But then Ezra let out a soft, tired whimper in her arms, and she climbed into the back seat without another word, holding him closer as if every step further was a betrayal she couldn't afford, but had to take anyway. The ride through downtown was quiet. Naomi sat upright, never slouched, her arms wrapped around Ezra like a shield. She didn't speak, didn't fidget, didn't cry. Julian caught her studying his reflection in the window more than once, her eyes not frightened but sharp, watching him, measuring. Not the way a child should have to. But she wasn't looking for kindness. She was looking for signs of whether this man might vanish like the last adult who promised to return. Julian made one phone call, and not to his office. "Elena, I need you," he said, keeping his voice low but firm. "Where are you?" came the answer. "Downtown. I found 2 kids. One of them is starving." Dr. Elena Rojas didn't ask more. She had known Julian long before the billions, before the boardrooms and the press. Now one of the most respected pediatricians in Texas, she'd spent her career serving children caught in the gaps, between parents, between systems, between hope and harm. She gave him an address and told him she'd be waiting. At the small clinic tucked between office buildings and convenience stores, Elena moved quickly. Ezra was light for his age, his skin a little dry, but there were no infections or injuries. Malnourished, yes, dehydrated, mildly, nothing they couldn't manage. Naomi, though visibly worn down, had no fever, no signs of neglect on her own body. Still, when food was offered, she shook her head until Ezra was eating safely in her lap. Only then did she quietly accept a sandwich and even then, she wrapped half of it in a napkin and tucked it into her coat pocket. For later, she said, as if she didn't expect there to be a next meal. Julian sat across the room, his phone untouched for the first time in years. The notifications stacked up, emails, meeting alerts, 3 missed calls from his CFO, but none of it mattered. What mattered was how Naomi never once set Ezra down. Not to eat, not to rest, not even to use the restroom. She held her baby brother like a mother would, like someone who had learned the hard way what happened when you let go. Later, Elena slid into the chair beside him, the clipboard tucked under one arm. "You know this isn't just a moment of kindness, right?" she said. "You're not patching a leak. This is a flood. It doesn't go away tomorrow." Julian didn't answer immediately. He just watched Naomi, sitting in the corner of the clinic, cradling Ezra and humming softly under her breath. Her eyes flicked toward him once. Not grateful, not hopeful, just waiting to see if he'd disappear like everyone else. "I know," Julian finally said, voice low, "but something tells me I'm not the only one being tested." The following morning, Julian stood by the kitchen counter, pouring warm formula into a bottle with the same precision he once reserved for product demos and investment pitches. Ezra was asleep again in the bassinet nearby, cheeks fuller now, hands curled like leaves. Across the room, Naomi was seated cross-legged on the couch, sketching something on a napkin with a ballpoint pen she must have picked up from the clinic. Julian noticed she didn't hum today. She hadn't spoken much since they left the clinic, but she hadn't looked away from him either. The quiet was interrupted by his phone vibrating on the counter. He glanced at the caller ID, Dr. Elena Rojas. He answered immediately. "Tell me." Elena's voice was calm but careful. "We found their mother. Her name is Tanya Ellison. She's alive, but in rehab. A psychiatric facility in San Marcos admitted her 2 days ago. No ID, no phone. One of the intake nurses matched the name to a missing persons report this morning." Julian leaned against the counter, the weight of the news anchoring him. She has a documented history of mental illness, untreated trauma, substance dependency, likely triggered after she lost her last job. There's no indication she abandoned them intentionally. But she's not stable. Not yet. She's still detoxing. He didn't speak right away. Elena continued. "The courts will begin a review. If she completes her program, proves consistent mental health and parenting capacity, she'll regain custody. That's the law. If she doesn't, the children will enter permanent care, likely placed in separate homes, unless a relative or guardian steps in." Julian stared out the window. The sun was rising over the Austin skyline, and for the first time in years, it felt like a clock he didn't want to race. That evening, after Ezra had fallen asleep again, Naomi approached him in the hallway. She didn't knock. She didn't hesitate. She just stood there, hands tucked into her sleeves, as if rehearsing something she'd carried all day. "Are they going to take us?" Julian turned to face her. "Your mother is in a hospital. She's trying to get better." Naomi nodded, but said nothing. "They haven't made any decisions yet," he added carefully. "But I'll do everything I can to keep you and Ezra safe." Naomi's voice was quiet but direct. "Will they split us up?" Julian didn't wait to answer. "Not if I have anything to do with it." She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded once and walked back to the couch, as if she'd just filed that answer away under still possible to hope. And that's when Julian knew this wasn't temporary anymore. Not in his home, and not in his heart. The next morning, Julian made 2 phone calls before the sun had even risen. The first was to his assistant, postponing every meeting for the rest of the week. The second was to Elena. "I want to apply for legal guardianship," he said, before she even asked. "Temporary for now, but real, on paper." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, then a quiet breath of relief. "This isn't going to be simple, Julian," she said gently. "There are background checks, court interviews, home evaluations. They're going to turn your life upside down. Are you ready for that?" "I think my life already turned," he replied. "I'm just trying to follow where it's going now." By noon, the paperwork had begun. Social workers were assigned. A court date was scheduled. Julian's mansion, once an architectural shrine to control and solitude, was suddenly filled with the smells of formula, the buzz of cartoons, and the rustle of small feet across cold marble floors. He moved a team in to retrofit one of the guest bedrooms into a nursery. The master suite remained untouched, still a hollow space that hadn't been used since his wife, Alicia's funeral. But the hallway between was now alive with soft footsteps and new routines. Naomi watched all of it with guarded curiosity, She never asked for anything but accepted everything with cautious grace. When Julian offered her new clothes, she asked if they could keep the old ones too, just in case. When a therapist arrived for her preliminary evaluation, Naomi sat through the questions like a student taking an exam she couldn't afford to fail. She didn't cry. She didn't fidget. She answered in full sentences, eyes level, voice calm. But Julian could see it. Beneath the poise was a child still holding her breath. One evening, a few days in, Julian found her in the study, curled up on the window seat, a book in her lap and Ezra asleep beside her. The light from the hallway spilled softly across the room. "You know," he said, leaning against the door frame, "you're not just good with him. You're incredible." Naomi looked up, eyes tired but sharp. "I've had to be," she said. "He only has me." Julian crossed the room slowly and sat across from her. "He has me now too, and so do you." She didn't nod, didn't thank him. But after a long pause, she shifted slightly, as if allowing him to share the space. As if, just maybe, he wasn't a stranger anymore. Julian stood in the center of his penthouse living room and realized, for the first time, it felt like a museum, a cold, expensive shrine to someone he used to be. Every surface gleamed, every corner was pristine, but nothing in the space breathed, not since Alicia. He'd left her things untouched for 2 years. The master suite still held the faint scent of her perfume, trapped in the silence like a memory he wasn't ready to touch. He'd thought that keeping everything in place would preserve her. But now, walking past Naomi's makeshift room down the hall, hearing Ezra babble from the nursery, he felt the weight of all that stillness. It wasn't preservation, it was isolation. He knew it couldn't last. A week after filing for guardianship, Julian moved them into a new house, far from the glass towers and echoing floors of downtown Austin. The property sat just outside Wimberley, where the trees grew wide and unafraid, and the wind carried birdsong instead of sirens. It was the kind of place you didn't need security gates or 20-digit codes. You just needed sunlight, a porch, and a place for small feet to run. Naomi said nothing when they arrived. She stood on the gravel path, arms folded, eyes tracking every inch of the wraparound porch and the big oak out back. Ezra, now healthier and louder, squealed from Julian's arms at the sight of the open grass. Julian watched Naomi closely. She didn't ask if the house was theirs. She didn't ask where they'd sleep. She just waited, as if expecting the moment to pass. Later that evening, after Ezra had fallen asleep in his crib for the first time in his own room, Julian found Naomi sitting alone on the back steps, legs drawn up, watching the dusk roll in. He sat down beside her, leaving space, saying nothing at first. After a few minutes, she spoke, quietly, but not hesitantly. "This doesn't feel real." Julian nodded slowly. "It didn't at first. Not for me either." Naomi turned to him, eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" He took a breath, the kind that caught just a little in the middle. "My wife passed away 2 years ago. Alicia. Cancer. Fast. Ugly. And after that, I didn't really live anywhere. I just stayed places." Naomi looked back out at the trees. "Is this where you're going to stay?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and handed her a small key. It was silver, worn around the edges, attached to a simple navy blue fob. "That one opens the front door. It's yours now, too." Naomi stared at the key in her hand for a long time. She didn't smile, didn't speak. But she curled her fingers around it and didn't let go. The days moved slower now, but they felt real. Mornings began with Naomi padding into the kitchen before sunrise. She didn't ask Julian to cook, but one day she slid a recipe card across the counter. Her mother's handwriting: cornbread, nobelium sugar, extra butter. Julian followed it exactly. Naomi didn't say it was good, but she finished every bite. Ezra was thriving. He babbled louder, giggled easier. Julian adjusted to a new rhythm: feeding schedules, toy rotations, fewer meetings. His phone stayed on the counter more often now, untouched for hours. Naomi had started at the local elementary school just a few miles down the road. She didn't say much about it, but Julian noticed she came home with her backpack zipped, her worksheets uncrumpled, and a quiet pride in how she placed her shoes by the door, like she belonged somewhere again. She began bringing her homework into the living room, helped Julian rake leaves, sat beside him when he read to Ezra. She didn't ask for space anymore. She quietly filled it. There were still moments, nights she didn't sleep well, food she hid just in case. Julian didn't push. He just stayed near, steady and unshifting. One evening, he found her at the table sketching. When she held up the paper, it showed their house, crooked windows, big tree, 3 stick figures out front. Ezra in Naomi's arms. Julian beside them, smiling. "That's you," she said. He nodded. "I figured. I didn't write your name." "You don't have to," he said gently. "You already drew it." She didn't smile, but she folded the picture carefully and tucked it into her backpack, like something worth keeping. Spring came early that year. The wildflowers bloomed along the highways, and the trees outside the courthouse were already full. Julian stood quietly in his suit, Naomi at his side, Ezra bundled in his arms. This was no longer a check-in. It was the final hearing. Today the court would determine whether Julian could become their legal guardian, permanently. But he wasn't the only one expected to speak. Tanya Ellison had been found nearly 3 months earlier. Rehab, psychiatric treatment, detox. According to the reports Julian had reviewed, she was trying. No arrests, no relapses. She'd attended all her required sessions, written letters to the court, and passed every drug screening. She had done everything the system had asked of her, except one thing: she hadn't requested to see her children. Until today. Inside the hearing room, the air felt heavier than usual. Dr. Elena Rojas sat behind Julian, quietly supportive. The CPS caseworker recapped progress. Ezra was healthy. Naomi was thriving in school, no issues, no setbacks, no doubts about the stability of the home. Then the judge looked toward the far side of the room. Tanya stepped forward, thin, pale, holding a single folded sheet of paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. She looked older than her age, her eyes hollow but clear. "I didn't come here to fight," she said, her voice rough but steady. "I've been sober for 90 days. I'm trying to heal. But I know what I put my kids through. I know what they survived because I left, and I'm not here to make them go through more." She paused, pressing the paper against her chest. "I believe I could get better, maybe even become a mother again someday. But I don't believe I'm the safest place for them now. Not yet. Maybe not ever, so I'm here to do the only thing I can still do right for them." Then she looked directly at Naomi. "I'm not giving up on you. I'm giving you up, because I want you to grow without carrying my fall." A beat of silence followed. The court clerk wiped her eyes. Tanya turned to the judge. "I'm relinquishing my rights, voluntarily, with no conditions." The courtroom stayed quiet as the judge took a long pause, then nodded. Julian didn't look at Tanya, not out of judgment, but out of respect. What she had just done was a kind of courage, too. Outside, as they stepped into the sunlight, Naomi held Ezra's hand tightly in hers. She didn't say anything for a while. But as they reached the car, she looked up at Julian. "So, what happens now?" He unlocked the door, opened it for her, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Now," he said, "we go home." The adoption was finalized 2 weeks later. There was no ceremony, no balloons or cameras, just a small, quiet courtroom with sun filtering in through high windows and 3 names printed on a single legal document that would change everything. Julian Reed sat with Ezra in his lap, dressed in a tiny blue shirt Naomi had picked out herself. She sat beside him, hair neatly braided, her school ID badge still clipped to her backpack, like she wasn't quite sure if she was supposed to dress up or not. But she had drawn a picture for the judge and tucked it into her folder just in case it helped. The judge glanced through the file, skimmed the reports, and looked up with a kind smile. "Mr. Reed," she said, "are you prepared to assume full legal custody of Naomi and Ezra Ellison?" Julian nodded. "I am." The judge turned to Naomi. "Do you agree to this adoption, Naomi?" Naomi didn't hesitate. "Yes, I do." And with that, the gavel came down. It was done, final, legal, real. Outside, the morning air felt softer than usual. They didn't have any place to be afterward, so Julian offered to take them for pancakes. Naomi said yes before he could finish the sentence. But later that night, as Julian tucked Ezra into bed and turned off the nursery light, he found Naomi standing in the hallway, barefoot, holding something behind her back. She walked over, slowly, and handed it to him. It was the same drawing, the house, the tree, 3 figures. But now, under the tallest one, she had written his name. Just one word. Dad. Julian felt his chest tighten, not in panic, in awe. He looked down at her, speechless. Naomi didn't explain. She just leaned in, wrapped her arms around his waist, and stayed there until he knelt and held her back. He didn't say it either. He didn't have to, because they were already home. Some stories don't begin with heroes or headlines. They begin with a single voice, asking not for rescue, but for someone to stay. Julian never planned to become a father. Naomi never expected anyone to listen. And yet, through one choice, one moment of stillness in a world that rarely stops, something lasting was born. Not just a family, but a future. What would you have done in Julian's shoes? And what do you think it truly means to show up for someone when it matters most? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what this story meant to you. And if you believe in the quiet power of compassion, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who might need it today. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.